You won't believe what happened in the quiet town of Maplewood this week. At a modest family-owned diner on Main Street, a kind-hearted waitress named Sarah decided to pay for a humble meal ordered by an elderly black veteran. It was a simple act of respect, a gesture of gratitude for his service. No one expected the fallout that followed by sunrise the next day. Rumbling tanks and uniformed soldiers rolled right up to the diner's front door, leaving everyone gasping and pointing. So how did a sweet, everyday act of kindness turn into an event that shook this entire community to its core? The sun rose every morning in Maplewood, with a gentle glow casting warm golden rays across the single strip of shops, the neat row of bungalows, and the old red-brick courthouse that had stood for over a century. Maplewood was the kind of place people described as friendly and slow-paced. It was tucked away, just a few miles from the hustle of Killeen, Texas, close enough to the famous Fort Hood, recently redesignated Fort Cavazos, that one could occasionally see convoys of military vehicles passing by on the highway. But those convoys rarely detoured into Maplewood itself. The town seemed too small, too unremarkable for that. In the heart of Maplewood, just across from the antique bookstore and next to the florist, was Annie's Diner. It had been a local fixture for over 30 years, famous for its fluffy pancakes and bottomless cups of coffee. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, and a chalkboard menu behind the counter advertised the day's specials in cheerful, scrawled handwriting. Locals would wander in every morning, farmers, retirees, and off-duty soldiers on occasion. They came for a taste of comfort, of nostalgia. The owner, Annie Russell, was a widowed grandmother who had poured her heart into this establishment since her husband's passing. She was no nonsense, but brimming with love for her community. Her staff was small, but dedicated, including 2 cooks, 1 dishwasher, and 3 servers who alternated shifts. In many ways, Annie's Diner was the living pulse of Maplewood, a place where news traveled fast and gossip traveled faster. Sarah Donovan was one of the regular waitresses at Annie's Diner. She was in her late 20s, with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile. She had moved to Maplewood nearly a decade ago, desperate for a fresh start. Raised by a single mother in a rough neighborhood, Sarah had always dreamed of a peaceful life, somewhere she could work hard, surround herself with good people, and maybe, just maybe, find her own little corner of happiness. She had her share of life challenges, a failed marriage at 23 debts that kept piling up, and an estranged father who floated in and out of her life without warning. But Sarah never let bitterness cloud her heart. She believed in kindness. Each day, she reminded herself that small acts of compassion could spark big changes in the world. Every morning before her shift, she'd tie her hair in a simple ponytail, slip on her worn white sneakers, and drive her old Honda Civic from her modest apartment on Elm Street down to the diner. She'd arrive just before 6 o'clock, greeting the cook, Manny, and the other waitress, Diane, with a bright morning, y'all. She made sure the coffee was fresh, the silverware polished, and the booths wiped down. On the day everything changed, Sarah didn't feel anything out of the ordinary at first. She simply put on her apron and stepped behind the counter, waiting for the sunrise rush of regulars, truck drivers, traveling salespeople, and older folks who loved the diner's early bird specials. It was around 8 in the morning when Harold Johnson walked into Annie's Diner. He was tall, with a posture that hinted at a military background. His hair was a soft grey at the temples, and his expression was calm but tired. He slipped into a booth by the window, resting a simple canvas backpack beside him. Sarah approached with her usual welcoming grin. "Good morning, sir. Coffee to start?" "Yes, please," the man replied politely. And maybe some eggs and toast. Actually, if you've got a house special, I'll take that. Sarah nodded. We have a Texan special scrambled eggs, bacon or sausage home fries, and a short stack of pancakes. That all right? That sounds wonderful, Harold said, his voice low and measured. And thank you. As Sarah poured his coffee, she couldn't help but notice the patches on his old bomber jacket, an American flag on one shoulder, and on the other a 1st Cavalry Division insignia. That was when she realized he must have served at Fort Hood, or perhaps had come from there originally. She didn't pry. She was never the pushy type, but something about his demeanor and the slight wince in his eyes when he sipped his coffee made her heart tug. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he was traveling. Maybe he'd seen things overseas that the rest of them couldn't even imagine. 30 minutes later, Harold finished his meal, stacked his plates neatly, and began rummaging through his backpack for his wallet. He paused, frowning, and rummaged again. His shoulders tensed. Sarah stood by the counter, noticing the tension on his face. Finally, Harold's lips parted in an embarrassed smile. I might have left my wallet in my car, he said quietly. I'll run out and grab it if that's all right. Sarah sensed more to the story. Perhaps he didn't want to admit that money was tight or that something else was amiss. Without thinking twice, she shook her head gently. Don't worry about it. Breakfast is on me today. Thank you for your service, sir. A wave of relief and disbelief washed over his face. He tried to protest, but Sarah pressed a palm softly to the air. Consider it a small thank you for all you've done. It's no trouble. Harold's eyes glistened. He swallowed hard and nodded. Thank you. That means more than you know. Word traveled fast in Maplewood, especially inside Annie's diner. A couple of other patrons had overheard Sarah's exchange with Harold. A middle-aged woman in the booth behind him, Louise Parsons, known to be a gossip, eyed the scene with a mixture of curiosity and something that Sarah could only describe as mild disapproval. Louise had always been subtle in her judgments, preferring sideways glances and hushed whispers over direct confrontation. She leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Why is she giving him free food? He's a stranger. We all pay for our breakfast." Her friend shrugged, then responded, "He's a veteran, Louise. Let it be." Sarah was aware of Louise's sideways glance. She tried not to let it bother her. She had done what felt right. After finishing his meal, Harold rose to leave. He thanked Sarah again, praising the diner for its hospitality. Just before he stepped out, Harold paused to look at a framed photograph of Annie's late husband, a picture of him in a Marine Corps uniform from the Vietnam era. Annie had hung it by the cash register to honor his memory. Harold touched the corner of the frame respectfully and murmured, "Semper Fi, brother," though he wore an army patch. Then, with a final nod to Sarah, he walked out. In the following hour, the usual breakfast bustle died down. Sarah cleared Harold's table, still thinking about how grateful he had looked. She wondered if he had any family. She wished she could have sent him off with a bag of groceries or pointed him toward a veterans support group. It was a fleeting thought, but it lingered in her mind. Louise, finishing her own meal, asked for the check. Sarah brought it over, but Louise's expression was sour. "You know," she began in a low voice, "it's mighty nice of you to give out free breakfasts to folks you just met. Might set a precedent you giving away Miss Annie's food." Sarah forced a polite smile. "I appreciate your concern, Louise, but that was my tip money. I covered his meal on my own." "Miss Annie's not losing anything." Louise pursed her lips and left a smaller than usual tip. "Just be careful about who you help in this world," she said, standing to leave. "Sometimes it brings trouble." Sarah, though, taken aback, tried not to let the words sink too deep. She busied herself with cleaning off the tables, thinking that was the end of it. If only she'd known how quickly everything was about to spiral. That night, Sarah drove back to her apartment on Elm Street. She put her keys in a small bowl by the door, fed her cat Shadow, and flopped onto her couch with a worn sigh. The day had been busier than usual, but Harold's visit kept replaying in her mind. Something about his demeanor, the silent pride, the humble thanks, had touched her deeply. She decided to call her mother, who lived 2 states away. "Hi, Mom," she said, cradling the phone to her ear. "Just wanted to check in." They talked about small things, how her mother's health was holding up, how Sarah's kid brother was adjusting to college life, and if Sarah was still saving up to go back to school. They had the same conversation every few weeks, and Sarah found comfort in the routine. She thought about telling her mother about Harold and the free meal, but she decided against it, not wanting to spark a lecture about finances, or how easily money slipped through Sarah's fingers. Later that evening, while scrolling aimlessly through social media, Sarah noticed a post in the Maplewood community group page. Someone had shared a little anecdote. Waitress at Annie's diner buys breakfast for local veteran. True Maplewood hospitality. She smiled, recognizing the event. A wave of warmth filled her, seeing that some people appreciated her gesture. But as she skimmed the comments, her heart sank. Some were supportive. "That's so sweet. We need more of this in the world. God bless our veterans and those who honor them." But others were skeptical or outright hostile. "She better watch out who she's giving free food to. Sounds like a scammer to me. Bet he wasn't a real vet." A creeping unease settled over Sarah. She shut her phone off. It had been a draining day. Tomorrow, she told herself she'd get up early and do it all again. Little did she know, morning would bring more than the usual clatter of plates and the aroma of fresh coffee. The alarm shrilled at precisely 500 a.m., dragging Sarah from a dream she couldn't quite remember. She slapped the snooze button, but didn't let herself drift back to sleep. After everything that had happened yesterday, Harold's visit, the tense glances from Louise, and that strange unease from the online comments, she wanted to get an early start and keep her mind busy. Outside, the early morning sky was still a murky navy blue, the stars barely visible above the dim horizon. A soft fog clung to the edges of the streets, like a heavy curtain reluctant to lift. Sarah wrapped herself in her cardigan, grabbed her keys, and slipped quietly out of her apartment. By 5:40, she was pulling into the back lot of Annie's diner. Her breath fogged the air as she stepped out of her aging Honda Civic and walked toward the rear entrance. As usual, the diner was still asleep, except for the light spilling from the kitchen window. Inside, Manny was already working, cracking eggs, chopping onions, humming something off-key under his breath. Morning Sarah greeted stepping inside. "Buenos dias," Manny said, barely looking up as he expertly flipped a pan. The kitchen smelled of fresh onions, melted butter, and brewing coffee. It was comforting familiar, until a low, distant rumble sliced through the morning quiet. Sarah paused in the doorway, frowning. "Did you hear that Manny looked up from the stove, wiping his hands on his apron?" "Yeah." "Probably thunder." Sarah glanced out the kitchen window. The sky was cloudless, clear as polished glass. "Doesn't look like a storm." A moment later, Diane arrived, hair pulled up and arms wrapped around her sweater. "You guys feel that?" she asked. "The ground's kind of shaking." Sarah moved quickly through the diner to the front. As she stepped onto the linoleum behind the counter, her feet registered a subtle but distinct tremor, like a faint, rhythmic pounding. She peered out the large front windows, expecting maybe a parade or construction convoy. What she saw instead made her gasp. At the far end of Main Street, barely visible through the sleepy town's haze, a formation of large headlights was approaching slowly, steadily, and in perfect alignment. But these weren't trucks or emergency vehicles. They were too high, too wide. As the shapes came into focus, Sarah's stomach dropped. Tanks. Real, actual tanks. They moved with deliberate authority, their turrets angled slightly forward. Heavy tracks grinding against the asphalt, leaving deep impressions on the quiet street. Behind them came military transport trucks, some armored, some open-bed, with soldiers riding in full gear. Manny Sarah shouted, her voice cracking. "Come here, now." He and Diane rushed to the window and stood frozen beside her. "Holy," Diane whispered. "Are we under attack?" Manny muttered something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer. The tanks were now crawling directly towards the diner. Their rumbling engines filled the air like the growl of some prehistoric beast. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear her own breath. It wasn't just the presence of military hardware, it was the sheer wrongness of it. This was Maplewood, for God's sake. Nothing happened here. Except now something had. The lead tank came to a halt directly outside the diner, its turret looming just past the flower boxes Sarah had watered only yesterday. Behind it, the convoy fanned out in a practiced, terrifying display of efficiency. Soldiers jumped down from the trucks, fanning across the sidewalk and street in silent formation. Their boots struck the pavement in unison. They were here for something or someone. Sarah turned to Manny and Diane, voice shaking. Why would the army come here? Why stop here? No one had answers. Then one soldier broke away from the others and approached the diner. He was tall, muscular, with precise movements and a focused expression. A black beret rested squarely on his head. Through the glass door, he scanned the diner's interior booths. Tables, kitchen line, before knocking twice. For a beat, no one moved. Then Sarah, adrenaline rushing through her limbs, walked forward and unlatched the door. "Morning, ma'am," the soldier said. Voice calm, but clipped. "Is the owner present?" She usually gets in. "Around 8, Sarah stammered. "Can I help you with something?" "We received a report," he replied, his tone shifting slightly, that there was an incident here yesterday involving a Black Army veteran. The report claimed he was refused service and asked to leave the premises. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. What she choked. "No, that's not what happened at all." The soldier furrowed his brow. "You were here?" "Yes," she nodded quickly. His name was Harold Johnson. He was polite, quiet. I paid for his meal myself. Behind her, Manny stepped forward. There was no incident, no disrespect. "We serve everyone here." The soldier studied their faces, then reached for his radio. "Stand by for confirmation," he murmured. Outside, the soldiers held position, but eased their postures ever so slightly. The tension began to shift, but the questions were far from over. Inside the diner, silence reigned except for the occasional crackle from the soldier's radio. Sarah stood, trembling, her hands clasped in front of her apron. Whatever was happening, it had just begun. It was surreal. The lead tank halted its engine, rumbling like a chained dragon. Military trucks lined up behind it, their hazard lights flashing. Within seconds, a handful of uniformed soldiers hopped out of the trucks and began taking up positions along the sidewalk. Sarah's heart hammered. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Are we under attack or something?" Diane, eyes brimming with fear, clutched Sarah's arm. Manny craned his neck to see if there was any sign of an emergency. The first soldier approached the diner door. He was tall, with a neat, close-cropped haircut beneath his beret, and a stern expression that softened marginally when he looked through the glass. Sarah couldn't think of anything else to do but open the door. The soldier stepped inside, scanning the diner with quick efficiency, as if assessing potential threats. "Morning," he said, his voice low and calm. "Is the owner here?" Manny cleared his throat. "The owner usually comes around 8. Can we help you with something?" The soldier nodded, looking slightly relieved at Manny's friendly tone. "We got word there might be a situation here. Something involving a veteran who was refused service." Sarah's jaw dropped. "Refused service?" She shook her head. "No, sir. That's not what happened at all." A flicker of confusion crossed the soldier's face. "We got an anonymous report. Claimed a Black Army veteran was disrespected and forced to leave without his meal. Something about a confrontation. We were told it escalated." Manny, Diane, and Sarah exchanged bewildered looks. Then Manny placed his hands on his hips. "That's absolutely untrue. We served him just fine." Sarah stepped forward, pulse racing. "In fact, I bought his meal personally. No one refused him anything. He was served with respect." The soldier stared at her a moment, then unclipped his radio from his belt. He muttered something into it. Outside, the other soldiers remained at alert, though their posture seemed to relax slightly. People in the neighborhood began to stir, poking their heads out of windows to see army vehicles and a tank parked in the middle of Main Street. "We're going to need to speak with you more in depth," the soldier said, his tone apologetic now. "May we?" Sarah nodded numbly, stepping aside to let him into the diner's seating area. He signaled to 2 of his men to join him, while the others stayed outside, redirecting any early morning traffic that might dare to venture into the scene. Sarah made coffee for the soldiers. Manny offered them seats at the counter, but they refused, standing stiffly near the booths. Diane hovered by Sarah's side, visibly trembling. The lead soldier, whose name patch read Staff Sergeant Miller, asked them to recount the events of the previous day. In hushed, shaken voices, they explained how Harold Johnson had come in, eaten a meal, and how Sarah had paid for him. There was no argument, Sarah insisted. In fact, he was very polite. "He thanked me multiple times." Staff Sergeant Miller listened carefully. Then he pulled out a small notepad from his breast pocket. "We got a call last night. They claimed that a man named Harold Johnson, who we do know is a retired sergeant first class, was denied service based on his race, mocked and told to leave the diner with no meal. The caller claimed that the restaurant staff threatened to call the police on him." Sarah's cheeks flushed with anger. "That's a lie." "A complete lie," she said, voice wavering with emotion. Diane jumped in. "I can vouch for Sarah. I was here. We all saw what happened, which is basically nothing but kindness." She paused, tears of frustration brimming. Why would someone do this? Manny's brow furrowed. Maybe someone with a grudge. Maybe they misunderstood the story and tried to be some sort of vigilante or something else. He looked at Sarah. "Did you have any arguments with customers yesterday?" Anyone who might have had an axe to grind. Sarah thought of Louise. The look in her eyes, her snippy comment, "Be careful about who you help in this world. Sometimes it brings trouble." But Louise, for all her gossip, wouldn't do something so drastic. "Right." Staff Sergeant Miller made a few notes. "All right, folks. We'll have to verify with Sergeant Johnson what really happened. But for now, it looks like this was a false report." He added with a wry half-smile, "I'm sorry for the dramatic approach. When we hear about a potential hate incident involving one of our own, we don't take it lightly." Before he left, he asked for their phone numbers and told them they might be contacted by the Army's Legal Affairs Division to clarify. Then, with a quick professional efficiency, the soldiers outside were signaled. The tank engines roared to life, and the military convoy rumbled off down Main Street, leaving the diner staff and the handful of early bird onlookers stunned and speechless. But Maplewood was wide awake now. Within minutes, cell phones were buzzing, and photos and videos of the tanks outside Annie's diner began appearing on Facebook and Instagram. Local residents rushed to ask, why did the army show up with tanks in the middle of Maplewood? What happened at Annie's? Sarah tried to steady her trembling hands as she resumed her shift. Customers trickled in, some bold enough to ask her directly, "Hey, what was that all about?" Others whispered among themselves in the booths, eyeing Sarah and Manny, with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Diane had to field the phone calls that started pouring in. News outlets from Killeen wanted to know if something big had happened in Maplewood. Even KWTX in Waco called inquiring if this was some military exercise. Annie herself burst through the diner doors around 8:15 out of breath, demanding to know why half her customers were calling her cell about a military standoff. Sarah took a deep breath and explained the situation to Annie. The older woman listened in shock. "I can't believe it," Annie said, voice trembling. "They said a black veteran was refused service. We would never." She stopped herself. "I'm sorry this is happening, sweetheart. I know you'd never do such a thing." Her expression grew stern, though not at Sarah. Who would spread such a lie? "We've never refused anyone in all the years I've run this place." Sarah shrugged, tears welling up. "I don't know, Miss Annie. But it's out there now. People are talking." Annie placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We'll handle this. The truth will come out." She turned her attention to Manny and Diane. "But I want to find out who's behind it. This is slander, and it nearly caused an armed incident in my diner." That day, the diner was busier than usual. Not with hungry patrons, but with busybodies and onlookers who wanted to see the place at the center of all the rumors. Sarah caught sight of Louise Parsons, standing across the street with a group of neighbors whispering and pointing at the diner. Sarah's intuition told her Louise was involved somehow. But she had no proof, and confronting Louise publicly would only make the gossip worse. As the lunch rush wound down, an unexpected visitor stepped inside. Harold Johnson. He stood by the entrance wearing the same bomber jacket, clutching a baseball cap in his wrinkled hands. The moment Sarah saw him, relief flooded her. She approached swiftly. "Oh, thank God you're here," she said softly. "Do you know what happened this morning?" Harold's face was lined with worry. "I got a call from an old friend stationed at Fort Hood. He said some official complaint came in, claiming I'd been harassed at a diner in Maplewood. He asked me if I was all right." Harold sighed. "I came as soon as I could. I'm sorry if this has caused you trouble." Sarah shook her head. "It's not your fault at all. Someone called in a false report, said we refused to serve you. The army showed up with tanks. Harold's eyes widened. Tanks? He let out a low whistle. Guess that explains the convoy I saw on the highway. I stopped them at a gas station to ask what was going on. They wouldn't give me details, but I suspected it had to do with me. Come sit, Sarah said, guiding him to a booth. Annie hurried over to meet him as well. Manny brought a cup of coffee. Harold explained that after leaving the diner the previous day, he'd spent the night at a friend's place in Killeen. He'd been planning to visit a Veterans Affairs office that morning, but the phone call from Fort Hood changed his plans. Is there anything you can do? Annie asked, frustration edging her voice. We're getting hammered by rumors here. Harold gave Annie a kind but solemn look. I'll do what I can. I can call my old commanding officer, or even talk to the local news. Let them know you treated me with nothing but respect. Sarah sighed. We'd appreciate that, Mr. Johnson. People are spinning all kinds of stories. Harold nodded. Please call me Harold, and I'll do everything in my power to help clear your names. While Harold made calls and tried to reach his contacts, Sarah and Annie decided to do some sleuthing of their own. They needed to figure out who had made that anonymous report. Diane brought up a crucial point. Who would have known Harold's name? The call specifically named him. How would a random bystander know his full name was Harold Johnson? It was a puzzle. Harold had never given his last name to Sarah in the diner, or at least she didn't recall it. He paid in cash. Well, he didn't pay because Sarah covered his meal. Manny wondered if Harold had shown an ID at some point, but Harold insisted he had not. Sarah remembered Harold's reaction when he realized his wallet was missing. Could he have left something behind that revealed his identity? But the diner staff hadn't found any wallet or ID. And Harold confirmed that he'd found his wallet in his car later. It was just tucked in a side pouch, not where he usually kept it. So if he had his wallet after all, nobody here saw his full name. Diane mused. He introduced himself as Harold, but that's it. So how did the caller know Harold Johnson? Harold ran a hand through his short, grey hair. I've posted in some veterans' Facebook groups, he said. I occasionally mention my full name. It's possible someone recognized me. But that's a stretch. Usually I keep a low profile. Sarah thought of Louise and her circle of friends, how they thrived on gossip and had social media on their phones all day. Could they have recognized Harold from somewhere? The question gnawed at her. She resolved to talk to Louise directly, if only to see her reaction. Early that evening, Sarah left the diner with an unusual surge of determination. She knew Louise lived not far from Maplewood High School, in a tidy little ranch house with pink shutters. Sarah drove there, heart pounding, and parked by the curb. Louise answered the door promptly, wearing a floral housecoat. Her eyes widened in surprise. Sarah, she said in a clipped tone. What brings you here, Sarah? Forced a polite smile. Hi, Louise. I was hoping we could talk for a minute. May I come in? Louise hesitated, her gaze darting nervously to the side. Oh, I suppose. She stepped back, letting Sarah enter the living room. It was decorated with crocheted doilies and porcelain figurines, exactly how Sarah had pictured it. Taking a seat on the plastic-covered couch, Sarah didn't bother with small talk. Louise, I need to ask if you know anything about the phone call that was made to Fort Hood. The false report about Harold Johnson. Louise stiffened. Why would you ask me? Sarah kept her voice calm. Because you were one of the few people at the diner yesterday morning. You overheard our conversation. and you seemed upset when I paid for his meal. You even warned me it could cause trouble." Louise's face flushed. "I just said you should be careful about who you help, that's all." Sarah pressed her lips together. "Louise, please. A false report was made claiming we refused service to a black veteran. The army showed up with tanks. Tanks, Louise. This isn't just petty gossip. Whoever did this put us all in danger. I'm worried about Annie. I'm worried about the diner's reputation." Louise rubbed her hands anxiously. "Well, I certainly didn't think it would go that far." Sarah felt her heart skip. "So you do know something," she said softly. "Please just tell me." Louise's eyes darted to the hallway, as though checking if someone else was listening. Finally, she sighed. "It was my nephew Martin. He's visiting from out of state. He was the one who overheard me talking about the diner. He has some strong opinions." Sarah's throat went tight. "Your nephew? Why would he do this?" Louise swallowed hard. "He thought that if the army believed one of their own was treated badly, they'd come down on you. He's been unemployed, bitter about how he was let go from his job, and I guess he decided to stir up trouble. I had no idea he was going to call the base. I just told him what happened at the diner, that you paid for the man's meal, that I thought it was suspicious. I didn't know Martin would. I'm so sorry." Anger and relief battled within Sarah. "He took your words and twisted them into a hate incident," she said, voice shaking. "Do you understand how serious that is?" Louise's eyes brimmed with tears. "I do now. I tried to talk him out of it, but he told me it was none of my business. By then he already made the call. I'm so sorry." Sarah let out a long, shaky breath. "Is Martin still here?" Louise shook her head. "He left this afternoon. I think he got scared when he saw the tanks in town. He's on his way back to Oklahoma." Sarah stood, feeling a swirl of frustration and disappointment. "Well, the damage is done," she said. "We'll let the authorities know the truth." Louise reached out to touch Sarah's arm, but Sarah stepped away. She wasn't ready to forgive. "Please don't tell the police I was involved," Louise whispered. "I didn't make the call. I swear." Sarah offered her a cold stare. "You might not have made the call, but you fed him the lies, Louise. Now you have to live with the consequences." She left the house, slamming the door behind her, her heart pounding. At least now she knew the source. But even if they cleared their names officially, Maplewood's rumor mill had already spun into high gear, and some people would never let go of a juicy story. The next few days were a whirlwind of chaos for Annie's diner. While Harold spoke to local news stations to clear up the false accusations, many potential customers stayed away, confused by the conflicting stories. Some claimed they'd heard the diner was racist. Others had heard it was all a misunderstanding. Still, the diner's reputation took a hit. Their sales dropped. Diane lost a few scheduled catering gigs for local events. Annie was forced to dip into her savings to cover the shortfall. As for Sarah, she became the target of online harassment. Trolls on social media posted vile comments calling her a liar, claiming she staged the whole event for attention. Some even posted racist memes under the diner's Yelp reviews, further tarnishing the business. It broke Sarah's heart to see her act of kindness twisted into something ugly. One afternoon, Sarah's old Honda Civic was vandalized in the diner's parking lot. Someone spray-painted "traitor" across the driver's side door. She stood there, tears slipping down her cheeks, as Manny tried to scrub away the paint with turpentine. He muttered curses under his breath in Spanish. Diane hovered nearby, fretting. Annie, who arrived moments later, looked like she might collapse from the stress of it all. "This is insane," Annie said, voice trembling. "All because you tried to be kind to a veteran." She let out a ragged sigh. "I'm worried, Sarah. I'm really worried." Sarah couldn't find the words to respond. She felt a swirl of guilt if only she hadn't insisted on paying for Harold's meal. But that thought made her angry too, because kindness shouldn't be something to regret. Yet the fallout was undeniable. Harold Johnson, determined to set things right, took to social media. He posted a video on his personal Facebook page, which he also shared in several military and veteran groups. "This is Sergeant First Class Retter. Harold Johnson speaking. I was the veteran who visited Annie's diner in Maplewood last Tuesday. Contrary to the rumors circulating, I was treated with the utmost respect by the staff, especially a waitress named Sarah Donovan, who personally covered the cost of my meal. I was not refused service, nor was I asked to leave. These false claims have caused significant distress to good people who are simply running an honest business. I urge everyone to stop spreading misinformation. If you have any questions, reach out to me directly. Thank you." Within hours, Harold's statement went viral. It was picked up by local news, then shared on national veterans groups. Supportive comments began to flood Annie's Diner's Facebook page, praising Sarah and condemning the anonymous caller. The truth was gaining momentum, but the damage done was already severe. And sometimes, once a rumor is unleashed, it's impossible to erase it completely. KWTX decided to do a follow-up story on the incident. Their reporter Melissa Green came out to Maplewood and interviewed Harold, Sarah, and Annie on camera. In the segment, Harold spoke passionately about how such misunderstandings can escalate. Sarah recounted how she paid for Harold's meal purely out of gratitude for his service. Annie, wringing her hands, reiterated how the diner welcomed everyone. The story aired on the 6 o'clock news, painting Sarah as a hero, wronged by malicious gossip. That same evening, Manny ran out of the kitchen waving his phone. "Look, we just got 100 positive reviews on Yelp in the last hour," he exclaimed. "People are rallying around the diner." Sarah smiled, tears of relief glistening in her eyes. For the first time in days, hope sprang up in her chest. Perhaps they could weather this storm after all. But Maplewood wasn't quite finished with its drama. Louise's nephew Martin had thought he'd gotten away scot-free by leaving town. However, the Army's legal division, spurred by the seriousness of the false report, had launched an investigation. Staff Sergeant Miller had taken statements from the diner staff, from Harold, and from phone records obtained with the help of local authorities. Within a week, they traced the call back to Martin's cell phone number. Further inquiries revealed he was the nephew of a Maplewood resident, Louise Parsons. The story hit the local news once more, exposing Martin's hoax. The community reacted with a combination of outrage and relief. Local law enforcement pressed charges for filing a false report. The Army's legal team was exploring possible additional charges under laws that prohibit causing undue alarm or interference with military operations. Martin found himself facing potential fines and possibly even jail time if convicted. Meanwhile, Louise Parsons was shunned by several neighbors who blamed her gossip for enabling Martin's lies. Her once close-knit group of friends now refused to invite her to their social gatherings. Some folks confronted her in the grocery store, demanding that she apologize publicly for her role. The shame weighed heavily on her. One afternoon, she showed up at the diner, trembling, tears in her eyes. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," Louise said softly to Annie and Sarah, who stood by the cash register. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I should never have gossiped the way I did. I never intended for Martin to do what he did, but—" She choked up. "I know it doesn't excuse my part in this mess. Please forgive me." Sarah exchanged a glance with Annie. They could see the genuine remorse in Louise's eyes. Annie sighed. "The damage is done, Louise. We both know that. But if there's one thing I learned from my husband, he always said, people deserve a chance to make things right if they're truly sorry." Sarah nodded hesitantly. "We appreciate your apology. If you really want to help, keep speaking the truth from now on. Tell everyone that the diner did nothing wrong." Louise sniffed, nodding vigorously. "I will. I promise." She left, looking a mix of chastened and relieved. With Harold's public statements and a wave of positive news coverage, Annie's diner began to see customers return. In fact, business started booming more than ever. People drove from neighboring towns just to show support. They came in droves, shaking Sarah's hand, thanking her for her kindness and praising Annie for running a restaurant that exemplified respect for veterans. Some even left $100 tips, insisting that Sarah put the money toward her own education or donate it to a veterans charity. Annie decided to harness the spotlight for good. She organized a Veterans Appreciation Weekend, offering free coffee and a 50% discount to any veteran who showed proof of service. Harold agreed to be a guest of honor, and he showed up all 3 days, greeting fellow vets, telling stories, and signing autographs for wide-eyed kids who marveled at the hero from TV. Diane arranged for a local band to provide live music in the diner's parking lot, giving the event a festive air. Manny cooked up special dishes inspired by his Mexican heritage, including hearty breakfast tacos that flew off the griddle. The weekend was an overwhelming success, bringing in record sales and heartfelt community bonding. All the while, Sarah was at the center of it, beaming as she saw the good that had come from a seemingly disastrous situation. She still felt a pang when she remembered the vandalism on her car or the hateful comments online. But seeing the diner flourish, seeing Harold happy, reminded her why kindness was never a mistake. Yet amidst the newfound success, Sarah wrestled with complicated emotions. One night after the diner closed, she sat down with Annie in the dimly lit dining area, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. The neon sign outside buzzed softly. They could see the silhouettes of chairs stacked on tables, and Manny's voice humming from the kitchen as he cleaned up. "What's bothering you, sweetheart?" Annie asked gently. Sarah gazed at her hands. "I guess I'm relieved that everything worked out, but I can't help thinking about how quickly it all spiraled from one simple act. How easy it was for a lie to nearly ruin us." Annie nodded. "It's a hard truth about our world, Sarah. One spark can start a wildfire of misinformation. But that doesn't mean we stop being kind. You did the right thing for Harold, and in the end, the truth prevailed." Sarah blinked back tears. "I know. It just makes me wonder about all the times rumors spread and the truth doesn't come out. About people who never get vindicated." Annie reached across the table, squeezing Sarah's hand. "That's why we have to keep doing right, even when it's dangerous or costly. If everyone stopped showing kindness out of fear of backlash, we'd lose the best part of our humanity." Sarah smiled weakly, appreciating Annie's wisdom. "Thank you, Miss Annie," she said. "I'm going to keep trying." "Good girl," Annie replied. "Now let's close up and go home. We've got an early day tomorrow." The next morning, Harold Johnson arrived bright and early, a broad smile on his face. He was carrying a large, sealed envelope. Sarah was wiping down a booth when she spotted him. "Morning, Harold." "You're here before the coffee's even brewed. What's up?" He grinned. "I've got something for you." He walked up to her, offering the envelope. "Open it." Sarah, curious, tore the seal. Inside was a check made out in her name, a startlingly large amount that made her gasp. "Harold, I can't accept this. This is too much money." Harold held up a hand. "Let me explain. Remember how this story went viral? Well, a few of my veteran buddies, plus some philanthropic folks who heard about what happened, decided to crowdfund a little something to thank you. And me, I've saved a bit over the years. I wanted to pitch in. Call it a token of appreciation from all of us you honored." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Thank you." Harold rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Use it to pay off your debts. Go back to school, or just give yourself some security. You have a good heart, Sarah. People like you should never regret doing the right thing." Sarah hugged him, tears spilling onto his jacket. Annie, who had overheard, dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Manny peeked out from the kitchen wearing a big grin. It felt like a dream, a vivid testament that kindness, despite the hardships and the cruelty of rumors, could still spark something beautiful. Over the next few weeks, the media frenzy cooled down. The army concluded their investigation, and Martin was charged with making a false report. He pleaded guilty, accepted a fine, and was put on probation. The diner's once rocky reputation rebounded now, shining brighter than ever. Locals who had avoided the place returned in droves. Even Louise Parsons, though still dealing with social repercussions, visited the diner regularly and attempted to make amends by championing the business at every opportunity. Sarah Donovan paid off her car repairs using a portion of Harold's gift. She enrolled in evening classes at the local community college, a dream she'd long postponed. Every day, she served customers at Annie's with an even brighter smile, as if to say, "Kindness endures." Harold continued to stop by occasionally, bringing fellow veterans who needed a friendly ear or a good meal. Manny, who had a heart of gold behind his gruff exterior, often slipped extra bacon onto their plates. Diane's daughter's soccer team even dedicated a match to local veterans, raising awareness and funds for a nearby VA hospital. Life in Maplewood returned to its gentle routine. The sun still rose with that golden glow over the quiet streets, and the chatter of neighbors once again revolved around simpler gossip, whose dog was barking too loud, who grew the biggest tomatoes, and what the high school football team's chances were this season. Yet there was a deeper sense of unity now. The fiasco that had nearly torn the community apart ended up reminding people that assumptions can be dangerous and that a single lie can sow chaos, but also that truth and kindness, when defended, could mend even the deepest wounds. One crisp morning, about a month after the tank incident, Sarah arrived for her shift early, as usual. She parked her old Honda Civic, now sporting a fresh paint job that Manny's cousin had done at a discount, and paused to admire the newly painted diner sign. Annie had renovated the facade, giving it a bright yellow trim and fresh lettering that read, "Annie's Diner Serving Maplewood," since 1987. Sarah stepped inside, breathing in the familiar aroma of coffee and scrambled eggs. She remembered the thunderous rumble of tank treads on Main Street, how her heart had lurched in fear as soldiers filed into the diner. She reflected on how one small gesture, buying a veteran's meal, had ignited a chain of events that led to panic, a media storm, and ultimately a stronger community. She hung her jacket in the back and tied on her apron. No regrets, she thought. No regrets for showing kindness. And so Maplewood moved forward. The tanks had long since rolled away, but the lessons they left behind remained. It was a story folks told with a shake of the head and a wry smile. Remember that day, the army rolled into town, thinking Annie's diner was some hotbed of hatred. Boy, did they get it wrong. Yet out of that chaos had come a profound reminder that an act of kindness can resonate far beyond one single moment, and that standing up for truth is always worth the fight. In the end, Annie's diner stood as a shining example of how a single act of kindness can change everything, both for better and for worse. Though the false report brought a wave of trouble, it also set in motion a chain of events that tested a small town's unity and faith in one another. Ultimately, the truth prevailed, and Maplewood emerged stronger and more compassionate than before. If this story stirred your heart, made you think twice about the power of rumors, or reminded you why kindness and honesty matter, we'd love for you to keep the message alive. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel so more people can discover the uplifting lessons buried within life's most unexpected twists. And remember, never underestimate the power of a small, thoughtful gesture, and always stand up for the truth when it matters most.